Hi, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly,
I'm Patrick Price.
and today we're going to talk about relationships as research. So we recently became engaged.
Hi, fiancé.
Hi, fiance. And part of Patrick's proposal had to do with lab coats. So we were out to dinner with friends, and he began to put on a lab coat at the end of dinner, and I was like, "Why are you putting on a lab coat?" And then he dropped to one knee in the floor of the restaurant, holding up a lab coat with a little cute little blue box on it. And I was like, "Whoa, what's happening?" And then he said,
I said that, we started our relationship with research, and I want to continue our research and be lifelong partners in research and love, and that our next research project should be marriage.
and I said, "Yes." So what do we mean by relationships as research? Well, Patrick has a background as an engineer, first of all, so he loves this kind of scientific approach. And what I love about the scientific approach of approaching our relationship as research, setting research containers within our relationship, is it fosters curiosity and it keeps you on the growing edge of what's happening between you. And so first, let's talk about the design of the research as a project, right? So if you want to, first of all, this is best done under the supervision of someone who knows what they're doing. So if you're interested in this idea and applying this idea in your relationship, reach out to me. There's contact information in the show notes, and I highly suggest you get support. That said, here's what it looks like. You pick a length of time and a very specific topic that you want to research together. You open the container deliberately, and you close it deliberately at the end of the amount of time that you've decided is the time. You debrief the research, what you've each discovered, and you might be debriefing along the way. It's not like you never talk about it for the whole length of the time. You might be debriefing along the way, but you definitely debrief at the end and share what you've each learned. Examples of things that can be approached. I really like your travel example. Would you lay that one out?
Sure. So there was once upon a time, we were two people who would get often very stressed and kind of irritable as we would get ready to head to the airport and fly out. It was always kind of a whirlwind of looking for things and putting things together, and and sometimes heated words. It would just get
We get tight.
we would get very tight. And so we did a research project where we would just change different variables. Like maybe we would change our wake up time, or we would change our habits around packing. Maybe start packing the day before versus be fully packed when we go to sleep at night, or make sure we get a good night's sleep before we head out. There's or trying different travel times to see if there were certain things that could make the traveling easier.
Yeah, and one of the things we noticed and learned through that research was there was a particular thing that would happen. We have very different styles of responding to stress. So this was the biggest thing we learned from the research, was that when I go into stress, I start to move quicker and I start to get critical. I get nitpicky. And when he moves into stress,
I slow down or stop.
He slows down and or stops. So as you can imagine, with these two very different kinds of responses to stress, right? We were just primed to explode before a trip.
Why are you slowing down? Why are you going so fast?
Exactly. So what we began to research was what happens if one or the other of us notices our own stress style beginning to happen and nipping it in the bud, or notices the other person's stress style beginning to happen if they haven't caught it yet, and offering support there instead of judgment. And that one thing was the thing that turned it around, even more than having rigid rules around what time we got up or how we packed, or because we have different styles around packing
just
too.
Understanding how each other works made it flow more smoothly.
Exactly. And we figured that out because we created a deliberate researched container around prepping for travel. So that's a very concrete example of what we're talking about. Another powerful thing, I'd love you to talk about what approaching relationship as research opened up for you when we first began approaching things this way.
Yeah, so for me, like before we started researching in this way, I just was very skittish in relationship in a way. I just kind of, in some ways, I was a very typical engineer, not emotionally stunted, but emotionally reluctant. And just because there's a part of me that doesn't like being unskillful, or not even not being unskillful. It's just I don't like people seeing me unskillful, and it was a place where I just felt clumsy and awkward and lacking skill, and so I just wouldn't play. And so with these research projects, because they were like small, bite-sized chunks, I could agree like, oh yeah, let's do this project for 5 days. Because I was willing to be awkward for 5 days or be uncomfortable for 5 days, and often it really wasn't as bad as my imagination made out. It's like, oh wow, this actually was quite enjoyable in a lot of ways, and some of my ideas about what I was capable and willing to do surprised me, and so there was a lot of surprise and a lot of willingness opened up. That was the biggest thing: is willingness to try things and willingness to be more adventurous in relationship.
Yeah, and it sounded like it allowed you to expand your range.
Oh, big time. There's just, I just wasn't even willing to play. And so like
Before.
Yeah, so it opened up like where I was willing to be playful and adventurous and curious. There was places I would just avoid. And then sometimes I might end the relationship or sabotage it because I was unwilling to like be more vulnerable or open up. But these small projects allowed me to open up at a pace that was comfortable enough for me to do it.
Yeah, and there's something about having a container around it that creates some safety because you're both engaged in this thing. There's an end date, and that there's a specific thing that you're focused on. And for me, what was helpful for me around beginning to approach relationships as research back 7 years ago when we started this was getting my head out of projections or inventions or romantic flights of fancy or the kind of what's flashing in my mind right now is being in like 4th grade and writing boys' names in my notebook, with their last name, right? Somebody I had a crush on or something like that. I don't remember if it was 4th grade, but whatever. And it's sort of getting out of that thing where you're projecting a thing, you're imagining a thing instead of being with what's actually right here in front of you. And so when you begin to approach your relationships as research, it helps to keep you in the present moment and focused on what you're wanting to learn. And it helps keep you as a team who's learning this thing. You're learning individual things within the research because you're different people. You're not necessarily going to be learning the same thing. You're going to have your own slant on whatever it is that you've decided to research together, but you're collaborating on this thing that you've each decided you want to prioritize and learn how to do better. And so our invitation is for you to consider approaching your relationships as research. I've been offering on the podcast, on the solo episodes, I've been offering various metaphors and ways to look at your relationship to gain some insight and vision into it. So you can check back to other episodes where I talk about approaching your relationship like a house and approaching your relationship like a car and how do you maintain your car and things like that. And here's a third option for how to approach your relationships in a creative and collaborative and generative way that helps each of you grow and each of you to gain more skill in an area that maybe right now the default is to avoid or push back or reject in yourself or in the other person. Do you have any final thoughts about relationships research you'd like to add?
Yeah, just that, in our lives, we learn about relationships through our parents, from our friends, things we see on TV, and we often don't have, a place to question those ideas. Like we just kind of take it and run with it, and we have this idea that we should just know how to do relationship. And without experimenting, there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding, not only in yourself, but in your partner and in your relationship. So the spirit of curiosity is super helpful and can help you learn a lot about how to be in relationships and do it well.
That's gorgeous. Thank you. So this has been Relationships as Research. This is Patrick Price, my fiancé. I love saying that. It's still so new. And I'm Maria Elizabeth Mali. And until next time, remember that a great relationship starts with you.